The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, as guard Marcus Thompson adjusted his iconic red uniform for what he thought would be another ordinary day. At 28 years old, Marcus had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 6 years, standing motionless for hours while tourists snapped photos and sometimes tried to make him laugh or move. He had seen it all, people making funny faces, children waving excitedly, and visitors from every corner of the world marveling at the palace's grandeur. Marcus came from a humble background in Yorkshire, where his father worked in a coal mine and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. Joining the Queen's Guard had been his dream since childhood, inspired by the discipline, honor, and tradition the position represented. His family was incredibly proud when he earned his place among the elite guards, though they rarely got to visit London to see him in action. That particular Tuesday morning felt different somehow. As Marcus took his position at the main gate, he noticed the usual crowd of tourists beginning to gather. Among them was a small group that caught his attention, an elderly woman in a wheelchair being pushed by a middle-aged man, accompanied by a young boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The woman appeared frail, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the mild weather, but her eyes sparkled with excitement as she gazed up at the palace. The family approached slowly, the boy's eyes wide with wonder as he pointed at Marcus in his tall bearskin hat and pristine red coat. The elderly woman, whom Marcus could hear was called Grandma Rose by her family, had traveled from Scotland specifically to see the changing of the guard ceremony. She had been battling cancer for 2 years, and this trip to London was something she had dreamed of for decades, but never had the opportunity to experience. As the morning progressed, Marcus remained perfectly still in his position, but he couldn't help stealing glances at the family. The little boy Tommy was trying to get his attention by waving enthusiastically, while his father gently reminded him that the guards weren't supposed to move or respond. Grandma Rose simply sat quietly, taking in every detail of the palace and the ceremony with a peaceful smile on her weathered face. There was something about her presence that stirred something deep within Marcus's chest, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. As the changing of the guard ceremony began, Marcus noticed that Grandma Rose's family had positioned themselves in the front row of spectators. Despite the growing crowd pushing from behind, no one seemed to mind giving the elderly woman in the wheelchair a clear view. The little boy Tommy stood on his tiptoes beside her, his excitement barely contained as the guards began their precise marching routine. Marcus could see that Grandma Rose was struggling to see over some taller visitors who had moved in front of her wheelchair. Her son David was trying to maneuver the chair to get a better angle, but the crowd was thick and space was limited. The old woman didn't complain, but Marcus could see the disappointment in her eyes as her view became increasingly blocked. During his years of service, Marcus had been trained to maintain absolute composure and never break protocol. The Queen's Guard was expected to remain motionless and expressionless regardless of what happened around them. Weather, crowds, or any distractions were to be ignored completely. Breaking this sacred rule could result in serious disciplinary action and potentially end his career. However, as Marcus watched Grandma Rose crane her neck trying to catch glimpses of the ceremony between the gaps in the crowd, something inside him began to shift. He thought about his own grandmother who had passed away 3 years earlier. She had always dreamed of visiting London, but never had the chance before her health declined. The regret he felt about not being able to fulfill that wish for her came flooding back. The ceremony continued with its usual pomp and precision, but Marcus found his attention divided between his duties and the elderly woman whose dream was being obscured by inconsiderate tourists. He noticed that Tommy had started tugging on his father's sleeve, pointing toward his grandmother and then toward the guards, as if trying to communicate something important. Then Marcus heard it, a soft coughing that seemed to come from Grandma Rose. It wasn't just any cough, but the kind that spoke of illness and frailty. David immediately bent down to check on his mother, offering her water from a small bottle. The woman waved him off with a weak smile, clearly not wanting to miss any more of the ceremony than she already had. At that moment, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Despite years of training and strict protocol, despite the potential consequences for his career, he knew he couldn't just stand there and watch this woman's dream slip away. The ceremony was reaching its climax, and if he was going to act, it had to be now. Without breaking his military posture, Marcus began to subtly shift his position. To any casual observer, it might have looked like a minor adjustment, but he was actually moving to create a better line of sight for Grandma Rose. However, he quickly realized that this small movement wouldn't be enough to solve the problem. Taking a deep breath, Marcus did something unprecedented. Still maintaining his rigid stance and serious expression, he slowly and deliberately took 3 measured steps to his left. The movement was executed with such precision and authority that the crowd instinctively parted, creating a perfect corridor of space directly in front of Grandma Rose's wheelchair. The spectators around them seemed confused at first, wondering if this was part of the ceremony they hadn't seen before. Some tourists started taking pictures of Marcus, thinking his movement was an official part of the routine. But those closest to the situation, including David and Tommy, quickly understood what was happening. Grandma Rose's eyes widened in amazement as her view of the ceremony suddenly became completely unobstructed. For the first time since arriving at the palace, she could see everything clearly. The other guards in their formations, the magnificent palace facade, and the entire spectacle she had traveled so far to witness. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she realized that this brave young guard had broken protocol specifically for her. Tommy looked up at his father with excitement, whispering loudly enough for nearby spectators to hear. "Daddy, the guard moved so Grandma could see better." David placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, equally moved by the unexpected kindness they were witnessing. The crowd around them began to understand what was happening, and a wave of emotion swept through the gathered tourists. People started stepping back voluntarily, giving the elderly woman even more space and a better view. Some visitors were wiping away tears of their own, touched by the guard's compassionate gesture. Marcus remained in his new position, still maintaining perfect military bearing, despite having broken one of the most fundamental rules of his position. He could feel the eyes of his fellow guards on him, and he knew that his commanding officers would likely hear about this incident. But as he watched Grandma Rose's face light up with joy and wonder, he felt certain that he had made the right choice. The ceremony continued, but now it had an entirely different atmosphere. What had started as a routine tourist attraction had transformed into something much more meaningful, a demonstration of human kindness that transcended duty and protocol. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus maintained his position while the other guards completed their routine and marched back to their posts. The crowd began to disperse, but many people lingered, clearly moved by what they had witnessed. Several tourists approached David to ask about his mother, and word quickly spread about the guard's extraordinary gesture. Grandma Rose sat quietly in her wheelchair, still gazing up at the palace with tears streaming down her cheeks. She turned to her son and whispered something that Marcus couldn't hear, but he could see David nodding and wiping his own eyes. Tommy had been unusually quiet since the incident, seeming to understand that something very special had just happened. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus's shift was finally over. As he prepared to return to the guardhouse, he noticed that Grandma Rose's family was still there, apparently waiting for something. David approached cautiously, unsure of the protocol for speaking to a guard who had just broken protocol himself. "Excuse me," David said softly. "I hope you don't get in trouble for what you did." "My mother! She's been sick for a long time, and this trip meant everything to her. What you did today, we'll never forget it." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion, but he maintained his professional composure. He couldn't officially acknowledge the comment while in uniform, but he gave the slightest nod, just enough to let David know he had heard and understood. Tommy suddenly broke free from his father's grip and ran up to Marcus. Before David could stop him, the little boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small toy soldier, a miniature version of a Queen's Guard that he had bought at the gift shop earlier that morning. "This is for you," Tommy said, holding up the tiny figure, "because you're the nicest guard in the whole world, and you helped my grandma see the pretty ceremony." The gesture was so innocent and heartfelt that several nearby tourists stopped to watch. Marcus looked down at the boy, then at the toy soldier, and for a moment his carefully maintained composure nearly cracked. He couldn't accept gifts while on duty, but he also couldn't bring himself to refuse this child's offering. Instead, Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He slowly and formally saluted Tommy, treating the 8-year-old boy with the same respect he would show to a high-ranking officer. The salute was crisp, precise, and filled with genuine emotion. The crowd that had gathered to watch this exchange erupted in spontaneous applause. People were openly crying now, touched by the pure humanity of the moment. Someone had been recording the interaction on their phone, and within hours the video would begin spreading across social media platforms around the world. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his quarters, still processing the events of the day. He had submitted his report to his commanding officer, fully expecting to face disciplinary action for breaking protocol. The Queen's Guard had rules for a reason, and personal feelings were never supposed to interfere with duty. His phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from friends and family who had somehow heard about the incident. Word traveled fast in the small military community, and apparently several tourists had already posted about the event on social media. Marcus felt a mixture of pride and anxiety about the attention his actions were receiving. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Sergeant Major Harrison, his commanding officer, entered with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. The older man had served in the Queen's Guard for over 20 years and was known for his strict adherence to protocol and discipline. "Thompson," the sergeant major began, his voice measured and serious. "I've received several reports about your conduct during today's ceremony. Care to explain yourself?" Marcus stood at attention and recounted the events honestly, taking full responsibility for his decision to break protocol. He explained about Grandma Rose, her illness, and how he couldn't bear to watch her dream be ruined by the inconsiderate crowd. He made no excuses and was prepared to accept whatever consequences awaited him. Sergeant Major Harrison listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing. When Marcus finished his account, there was a long silence that felt like it lasted forever. Finally, the older man spoke. 23 years I've been doing this job, Thompson. 23 years of standing at attention, following orders and maintaining the dignity of this position. And in all that time I've never seen anything quite like what you did today." Marcus braced himself for the worst. But the sergeant major's next words completely surprised him. "The royal household has been contacted by dozens of people today. Tourists, media outlets, even government officials have been calling to share what they witnessed. But more importantly, I received a call from a gentleman named David McLeod, whose mother you helped today." The sergeant major paused, and for the first time since Marcus had known him, the stern military man seemed to be struggling with emotion. "Mr. McLeod wanted us to know that his mother passed away peacefully this evening at their hotel. Apparently, she spent her final hours talking about the kindness of the young guard who made sure she could see the ceremony. She told her family that it was the most beautiful day of her life." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The news hit him like a physical blow, and he had to steady himself against the doorframe. Grandma Rose was gone, and their brief encounter that morning had been one of her final experiences. The weight of Sergeant Major Harrison's words settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. Knowing that his small act of kindness had contributed to making Grandma Rose's final day meaningful filled him with both profound sadness and deep gratitude that he had followed his instincts. "Family has requested permission to attend tomorrow's ceremony," the sergeant major continued. "They want to honor their mother's memory at the place where she experienced such joy." Mr. McLeod also mentioned that young Tommy hasn't stopped talking about the hero guard who saluted him over the next few days. The story of Marcus's gesture spread far beyond the palace gates. The video of him saluting Tommy had been shared millions of times across social media platforms, with people from around the world commenting on the power of human compassion. News outlets picked up the story, and Marcus found himself reluctantly thrust into the spotlight. The royal household, rather than disciplining Marcus for breaking protocol, issued a statement praising his actions and the values he demonstrated. They announced that while maintaining tradition and protocol remained important, showing compassion and humanity would never be discouraged when it came from a place of genuine kindness. Marcus received hundreds of letters from people who had been touched by his story. Many shared their own experiences of loss and how his actions had reminded them of the importance of treating every moment as precious. Parents wrote to thank him for showing their children what true heroism looked like. Not the dramatic kind seen in movies, but the quiet courage to do what's right when no one is watching. The most meaningful letter came from David McLeod, Tommy's father. He wrote about how his mother had spoken about Marcus in her final hours, describing him as an angel in uniform who had made her dream come true. The letter included a photo that had been taken during the ceremony. Grandma Rose sitting in her wheelchair with a radiant smile, finally able to see everything clearly thanks to Marcus's intervention. Tommy had also drawn a picture that his father included with the letter. It showed a tall figure in a red uniform standing next to a smaller figure, both saluting each other under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being nice to my grandma and me." The drawing was carefully framed and placed on Marcus's desk, where it served as a daily reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the most profound impact on someone's life. Months later, Marcus continued his duties as a member of the Queen's Guard, but something fundamental had changed within him. The experience with Grandma Rose had taught him that true honor came not just from following rules, but from recognizing when human compassion should take precedence over rigid protocol. The story had become legendary among the guards, and new recruits were often told about the day when one of their own chose kindness over convention. It became an unofficial reminder that behind the ceremonial uniforms and tourist attractions, they were still human beings capable of making a real difference in people's lives. Marcus kept in touch with David and Tommy McLeod through occasional letters and emails. Tommy was doing well in school and had written several essays about his experience at Buckingham Palace, always referring to Marcus as his hero. David had started a small charity in his mother's memory, helping elderly people fulfill their travel dreams while they still could. On the first anniversary of Grandma Rose's visit, the McLeod family returned to London. This time, they brought other elderly residents from the care home where Rose had lived, giving them the opportunity to experience the same wonder she had felt. Marcus was on duty that day, and when he saw the group approaching, he felt the familiar stirring in his chest. As the ceremony began, Marcus noticed an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair struggling to see past the crowd. Without hesitation, and with a slight smile that only those who knew his story would understand, Marcus began to subtly adjust his position once again. The crowd, recognizing what was happening, immediately parted to give the man a clear view. Someone in the gathering started clapping, and soon the entire crowd was applauding, not just the ceremony, but the continuing legacy of compassion that had started with one guard's decision to put humanity before protocol. Tommy, now a year older and wiser, watched from the front row with tears in his eyes. He understood better now what his grandmother's final day had meant, and how one person's kindness had created ripples that continued to touch lives long after the initial gesture. As Marcus stood at his post, watching the joy on the elderly visitors' faces, he thought about Grandma Rose and smiled. He had learned that sometimes breaking the rules was the most honorable thing you could do, and that true service meant serving not just the crown, but the human heart. The small toy soldier that Tommy had given him remained in his quarters, a permanent reminder that heroism often comes in the simplest acts of love and kindness. The story of the Royal Guard's unexpected gesture had become more than just a viral moment. It had become a testament to the power of compassion to transform ordinary moments into extraordinary memories that last forever.